Geek to me radio, da 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 da. Geek to me radio, da 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 da. Welcome, geeks and nerds, girls and boys, to a brand new episode of Geek to Me Radio. Tonight, we have my interview with writer Glenn Greenberg. He's written for Time, Entertainment Weekly, People, and his comic book writing is nothing to be sneezed at. Dracula, Silver Surfer, Spider-Man, Hulk, and more. We'll get into all that. Please stand by. We're talking TV, comics and movies, and video games. And if you don't know Star Trek from Star Wars, we'll try to explain. There are 12 doctors for Hogwarts houses, one ring rules them all. To be the greatest Pokemon master, you must catch them all. You must catch them all. Try to catch them all. Gotta catch them all. Gotta catch them all. And if you're driving around the greater St. Louis area tonight, listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS, hello to all of you. No video tonight, unfortunately. Joey V is not in studio, which means no video. This is a pre-recorded interview. I am live. I'm here right now on November the 3rd in KTRS studios, but the interview was previously recorded. Sometimes I have guests and they can't do Sunday nights at whatever time it might be in their time zone, which I totally get. It's been a weekend. You might be wrapping up the weekend with your family, or you might have something to do going on, or maybe it's later where they are and it's like, boy, I got to get up early Monday morning. Whatever the case is, I'm always happy to pre-record these interviews, and that's what happened with my current guest, Glenn Greenberg. We had a great talk about the work he's done. We've been Facebook friends for a while. We finally met at Terrificon in Connecticut, which, again, if you're listening and you've never been to Terrificon, this isn't a plug for Terrificon by any means, but Mitch Halleck puts on a fantastic show, so I always like to give him his accolades. But I met Glenn in person, I should say, there, and we had a chance to chat. And I said, man, I'd really love to get you on the show. So after going back and forth for a little while, we finally were able to arrange a time to have a chat, and that is what you are going to get to hear right now. Right now we're talking with writer and journalist Glenn Greenberg. We've been Facebook friends for a while, and we finally met at Terrificon this past summer, and now I finally get to chat with you. How's it going?
It's going fine. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Good. How was Terrificon? Mitch puts on a great show. I think, was that your first one that you've done?
My first Terrificon is also my first time at Mohegan Sun, so it was like a double whammy. We had a great time, my wife and I. It was very a very pleasant experience. I hope I can do it again.
Yeah, it's a great show, and a lot of people who do it once usually come back. I know Paul Kupperberg's usually there, and Dan Chichester had to miss this past year, but he's been there 2 years in a row. So it's always fun because the people who come back, they do it because Mitch does such a great job.
Yeah, I was very impressed.
And you had all those comic books out there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that you wrote this, because I think of you, I think of a lot of Star Trek stuff, but then there's also obviously the Rampaging Hulk, which I read that. I love that series. Well, you rolled your eyes. Did you not like writing that one?
Well, the experience itself wasn't particularly a positive one. I love the Hulk. The Hulk is my favorite Marvel character, always has been, and I've always wanted the opportunity to write him. So it should have been a dream job, but there were a lot of factors involved with that particular project that it didn't work out the way I would have liked. I had much better experiences working on pretty much everything else that I did at Marvel. That was like the one, and I don't want to paint too negative a picture. It wasn't all bad. There were some good moments, but overall, I've gotten, especially because I've been doing more conventions lately, I've gotten a lot of compliments and praise on that particular project, and I'm very glad that people enjoyed it. It's just it's something where like my experience was very different. So I'm glad that the work came out well, and that people couldn't tell from the actual work that I really wasn't having that good a time. But yeah, I'm glad you think that the work held up. I'm glad that you liked it. It's just sort of like, I had a much better time working on other stuff.
We don't need to get too deep into that because obviously I don't want to sit here and nitpick. Well, why was that? But was it not the story you pitched? Was there a different story you would have wanted to do? Like you said, Hulk's your favorite. Now I'm curious why Hulk is your favorite and kind of what you originally envisioned wanting to do with him.
Well, it becomes sort of like it happens in stages. So, for example, my first preference would have been for the book to be set in the present day, so that it would have been parallel to what Peter David was doing in The Incredible Hulk at the time. Because I feel like if you do an entire series that's set in the past, there's no sense of drama, there's no sense of suspense, there's no tension, because you know that everything's going to turn out well, because nothing's going to happen to the main character or any of the supporting characters that you're using from the main cast.
Right.
So that wasn't my preference. So once I was told, no, it has to be set in the past because we want to use the Hulk smash Hulk. So it was like, okay. So then you make your first concession. It's like, okay, I can still do this. And then you have in your mind who would be the perfect artist. And then they come back to you and say, well, this is the artist we've lined up. And it's sort of like, okay, I can work with this. And so that's two hurdles that you've had to jump over. And then it's like, okay, here's what I think the first issue should be. And you're told yes. And then you're told after you start working on it, well, no, it should be this instead. And it's like, okay, I'll jump over this. So it's like it was one after another. And it's after the first two warning signs, I should have like expected no differently, from the final outcome. But when you've got, and then the other thing is that the artist and I just did not click. Right from the start, we just did not click for whatever reason. I'd like to think that I put my best foot forward and tried to be very amenable and easy to work with. But there were some things that happened right from the very first issue where I again made concessions that I didn't think were necessary, but I wanted to be a team player, and it kind of blew up in my face. And I said, wow, is this going to be, what this entire series is going to be like? So, I was able to, come up with stories that I felt were going to be good for the book. They came out the way they came out. The artist draws them, I script them, and what gets out, gets out. I always did the best that I could. But it's one of those things where it's a compromised vision. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. That comes with working with other people.
Sure.
But if it takes you so far from where your starting point was, it can become an unpleasant experience.
So then working on the Spider-Man titles, was that more pleasant, or was it kind of indicative of how things were going with Marvel at the time, where they had a little too heavy-handed with the editorials and the decrees?
Well, sometimes. I mean, Spider-Man was going through a very interesting phase at that time. This would have been, 1995 to 1998. And it really depended on the Spider-Man project. Sometimes I'd come in and bat cleanup. So, for example, if J.M. DeMatteis was too busy to script an issue of Spectacular Spider-Man that he'd already plotted, and they needed somebody to just go in, because the art came in, they needed somebody to write the dialogue. They come to me. So I basically would be completing somebody else's story.
Okay.
Another time, Mark DeMatteis was leaving Spectacular Spider-Man in the middle of a storyline, and I was asked to come in and wrap up the storyline. So I did that. So it wasn't really my story.
Okay.
The best thing that I could do was write snappy banter and make it an enjoyable, fun experience to read, and uphold the goals and intentions that the other writer had when he was writing the story. I tried to sort of live up to his vision. But then I got to write Spectacular Spider-Man for a few issues, and I came up with a story called Goblins at the Gate, which was a 3-part story that I brought in Roger Stern to co-write with me. So that was one that I generated, and everybody stayed away from us. Everybody stayed out of our way, and we got to do what we wanted to do, except for the ending. The ending had to be altered because it would have affected the other Spider-Man books. And so the main Spider-Man writer at the time said, "Ooh, can you not do this because it affects my future plans?" And we're like, "That's absolutely fair." So that was it. But other than that, Goblins at the Gate was a blast. It really depended. I wrote an issue of Spider-Man Unlimited that from beginning to end was all me. Mm-hmm. It was my idea, my story. I pitched it. I did it. No compromises whatsoever. So it really depended on what the project was. But I overall, I had a very pleasant time working on Spider-Man.
Yeah, the Goblin's Gate one that you did, that was, I guess, right around the time that they were still doing the Ben Reilly, Peter Parker thing. So I guess that would have impacted the main book in that way. Had you done something with the Goblins?
Ben Reilly was dead at that point.
Oh, that was after. Okay, it was after that. Okay,
this was post Clone Saga.
Gotcha. Okay.
Excuse me. And we brought back, as you probably remember, at the end of the Clone Saga, we had brought back the original Green Goblin,
right,
Norman Osborn. So he was back on the playing field and was able to be used. And so, when the opportunity for me came to write Spectacular Spider-Man for a few issues, a thought popped into my head that Roger Stern and I had talked about recently, at that time, because Roger had come back to do a 3-issue limited series called Hobgoblin Lives.
Right.
Where he brought back the original Hobgoblin and finished that storyline the way he originally intended. So Roger and I were became very friendly. We worked very closely together on Hobgoblin Lives. And he was saying, if I ever get to do a sequel, he said, well, I'd love to do a story where the original Hobgoblin, now that he's back, meets the original Green Goblin, now that he's back. Because, they were never alive at the same time,
right,
so to speak. So when the offer came to me to write 3 issues of Spectacular actually it was more than 3 issues, but when the offer came to me to write Spectacular Spider-Man, the first idea that popped into my head was, well, original Hobgoblin versus original Green Goblin. But I realized I couldn't do that story without either A, getting Roger's blessing, or B, inviting Roger to come aboard and write it with me.
Sure, yeah.
So we went with the latter idea. And so Roger was absolutely amenable to come aboard. And that's how it came together. It was just that Norman and Roderick were both back in play for the first time in either character's history.
Do you keep up with the titles at all now? Because I know they just had Roderick face off with Norman recently in the Spider-Man that I think Zeb Wells is writing with John Romita Jr. penciled. I don't know if you keep up with them at all, or.
I get them. I've fallen way behind in my reading. So I try to at least have a vague idea of what's going on in the books. But I didn't know about this story that you're talking about. I'm way behind in everything. I'm trying to read more than just comic books.
Sure.
And also I've been doing a lot of writing over the last few years. So it just eats up my time. The last few things that I've read were just fiction, prose fiction. Novels. So it just eaten up a lot of my time that I can't remember when's the last time I actually picked up a comic book. I guess it would have been about a few months ago. I started reading the Nick Spencer run of Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay.
And I put it aside after the big Kraven storyline. The original Kraven dies again, and he's replaced by his clone son, whatever you want to call him. And so I was like, all right, I've read like 25 issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Time to put that aside and just read something else.
Yeah.
So at some point I will get back to the rest of that Nick Spencer run. But I mean, in terms of the Hulk, the last thing I read was the end of I read the Al Ewing run in one big lump.
Okay.
All however many issues.
50, I think of Immortal Hulk.
50 yeah. I thought it was 60, but maybe it was 50. So I read all of that in one big, marathon. So I haven't, and I maybe read the first couple of issues of the Donny Cates run, and I was like, all right, I'll get back to this at some other point. But no, I haven't kept up with anything.
Yeah, there's so much to take in. I mean, you figure all the comic books that come out each week. It's even for someone like me, I've got a short box. You can't see it here, but it's sitting right by my desk, a short box full of unread comics that I'm just keep adding to the pile. It's very hard to keep up with everything.
Yeah.
And I know you said you were doing some writing now. You've written a lot of stuff. We mentioned in your intro, journalist for Time, for Entertainment Weekly, for People and things like that. Can you share a little bit about what you're working on now? You're writing, or is it kind of not able to be talked about yet?
Oh no, I've been doing these projects. They're called bookazines, and even though if you may not be familiar with the term, I guarantee you know what they are. They're these single themed magazine-sized books that you can find in supermarkets, grocery stores, drugstores, Barnes and Noble in the entertainment section, the magazine entertainment section. They're basically magazines, but they're all devoted to a single subject. So over the last few years, I've written more than a dozen of them for various publishers, including Time. I've contributed to bookazines published under the Entertainment Weekly banner, People, for subjects ranging from, I mean, the ones that I wrote on my own, I've written 4 about the Beatles, or the individual members of the Beatles. I've written about Star Trek, Marvel, Stan Lee, Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Dracula. So yeah, it's like I said, it's been more than like a dozen.
Wow.
And four of them were all Beatles related. So that kind of adds up after a while. And I've contributed to a few others. I contributed to one about The Godfather. I contributed to one about Lord of the Rings. For Entertainment Weekly, I wrote for their X-Files special.
Okay. Yeah.
And I wrote for their special devoted to the Avengers. And a few nonfiction ones too, because I was a history major in college, so they tapped into that area of my brain. That was for Time, actually. I did one about the history of great jail prison escapes.
Oh,
I contributed to that one. So some nonfiction. Well, actually, the Beatles are nonfiction, of course.
Right.
So yeah. But all of these books are like historical. They take a historical approach and tell everything from a real world standpoint. So with Superman, it's not like a biography of Clark Kent was born. It was the history of how Siegel and Schuster came up with the concept, how they sold it, how they got screwed out of their, working on their creation, how Superman exploded as a pop culture icon. Same with Batman, same approach with Batman, same approach with Spider-Man, and the Marvel universe. So stuff like that. It's comprehensive, but also light reading. I mean, to do these subjects real justice, I'd have to have like 200, 300 pages to work with. With each of these, I have 100 pages. So they're very image driven. There's a lot of photos, a lot of illustrations, as is appropriate. But I try to make the text as informative while also being as brief and as breezy as possible. But a friend of mine, for example, just wrote to me. He said he just read my John Lennon bookazine and said he learned a lot that he didn't know before. And my reaction is, then my job is done. And I do that with everything. I try to dispel myths. I try to clear up misconceptions. I try to dispel rumors that aren't true. I did that with the Siegel and Schuster. I did that with the Batman one, really getting to the heart of the whole Bob Kane, Bill Finger storyline.
Yeah.
And just telling the facts and getting it out there so that people understand, what the reality was versus, the stories that have been told over the years.
So you said there's 4 Beatles ones that you put out there. Was there going to be maybe a thinner addendum one on Pete Best, the infamous member of the Beatles who didn't make it into the final cut?
I just like showing off my nerd knowledge sometimes because not everyone remembers poor Pete Best. So I just like to throw those kind of questions out there. We're talking with Glenn Greenberg. We're going to come back, get his answer to that Beatles question about his bookazines. And we're going to talk about a lot of comic book stuff going forward as well, including his work on Star Trek Untold Voyages. You're listening to Geek to Me Radio on the Big 550 KTRS. Please stand by.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. You're listening to Geek to Me Radio.
Welcome back to the show. Geek to Me Radio, heard here on the Big 550 KTRS every Sunday night, 9 o'clock. That's 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. For those of you listening outside our greater St. Louis, St. Charles area, want to make sure we tell you about our official comic book sponsor, Bugs, Comics, and Games. Sitting here talking with Glenn Greenberg all about comics like Spider-Man and Hulk and soon Star Trek. Want to make sure if you're looking for any of those comics, if you're like, man, they did a Star Trek comic covering the second voyage of the USS Enterprise? Yeah, they did. You can probably find those along with a bunch of other cool comics at Bugs, Comics, and Games. 1664 Bryan Road in O'Fallon, Missouri. If you're looking for something specific, give Larry a call at the store, 636-294-9427. Make sure you're following him on Instagram, instagram.com/BugsComicsAND Games. And, of course, Facebook.com/BugsComicsAndGames. He's got a big anniversary sale going on. I can't believe it's already been 3 years. It seemed like he just opened yesterday, but he's at his new location there on Bryan Road, 3 years now. Big anniversary sale going on November the 9th and the 10th. That's coming up real quick here, boys and girls. So if you're wanting to go get some comic books, get this. 50%, 50, half off everything with the exception of supplies and new comics, meaning comics that are new that week. But you can get out there, all those back issues. He's got boxes and boxes and boxes of back issues. Funko Pops, the books in his case, the ones on the wall, the shelf full of games. He's got vintage games, the toys that he has in boxes, sitting there, all the action figures and everything. 50% off, half off. If you've been in there before and like, man, that'd be cool to get that comic, or boy, that I'd like to get a couple of those action figures. But I get it, the economy, you know what I'm saying? But now's a great time to get in there and be like, oh, well, now it's buy one, get one, essentially, if you're getting some of those action figures, or if you want to get some of those books in the case that are $200, or some of his Silver Age ones that he's got sitting there, and you're like, boy, I'd love to get that, but I just can't. Now's your chance. Get in there and get it. And he's going to have a lot of other stuff going on as well. Bugs, Comics, and Games. Give Larry a call. Again, 636-294-9427, or pop by and say hello. It's not a comic book store unless they have back issues. That's what I always say. And boy, has he got back issues, which you'll now get half off of on his big sale, November 9th and 10th. Come on. Make your plans now. I'll see you out there, because you can bet I'm going to be out there getting some of my comics half off, and I've also had my eye on, not going to lie. So hopefully you don't beat me to it, but if you do, more power to you. Bugs, Comics, and Games. Very proud to have them as the official comic book sponsor here on Geek to Me Radio. Talking with Glenn Greenberg, my interview with him from earlier. Before we took that last break, I was asking him about these bookazines that he's written, and we talked about the Beatles ones. He said he had 4 out. I'm like, well, did you not get to poor Pete Best?
John Lennon book that I did, and also the Paul McCartney one. But the Beatles one, I it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I would be surprised if Pete was not mentioned in the Beatles trivia book, which is another one that I wrote. But the other one, the fourth one, was about the White Album. So Pete was long gone by then. So he wasn't really relevant
right.
at that point.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, and I you mentioned all the books that you wrote. The one with Indiana Jones, I'm curious because they had that 5th movie came out, which, I as an Indiana Jones fan, I just couldn't get through that movie without kind of wishing they'd done so many different things. What were your thoughts on Dial of Destiny?
The funny thing is the Indiana Jones book that I wrote was written and scheduled to tie in with what was supposed to be the release of the fifth movie. And right in the midst of writing the book, the movie got pushed back a year.
Oh, yeah.
The news came out that the movie got pushed back a year. So I was like, this is interesting. And then the fact that Spielberg had dropped out, I was like, well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I was following the rumors all along. How could I not? I was writing about
exactly
the character. So I was, you know, the more I was hearing about it, the more nervous I was becoming about it. I tried not to be influenced by the rumors because the rumors got pretty crazy in terms of what the ending was supposed to be and what got changed and why it got changed. So I tried to like sort of put that aside. What I can say is I enjoyed the first hour. But around the hour and 5-minute mark, you know, I just realized that I really wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I really did not like the character that Phoebe Waller-Bridge was playing. After an hour and 5 minutes, I just decided I really do not like her. I'm not enjoying this. And by the time it resolved, I thought the last scene or so was great. The big resolution at the very end, but I never. And this happens after the hour and 5-minute mark. I never bought into what the MacGuffin was, what the Dial of Destiny was, and how it worked. That if you just fly into a storm at the right coordinates, you can go travel back in time. A lightning storm, it's electricity. How does electricity send you back in time?
Yeah.
I mean, it just I just did not buy into the MacGuffin. I can buy into the Ark of the Covenant because you're bringing in the power of God. You can't tell me what God can or can't do.
Sure.
There's no rule book for that. You know, it's like, okay, I can buy into that. I can buy into the stones, you know, the Sankara stones. It's magic. It's supernatural. Okay. Of course, you know, if I have to buy into the Ark of the Covenant, I can buy into the Holy Grail.
Right.
You know?
Same premise, yeah.
Same basic premise, the power of God. It's indefinable. But when you're dealing with, you know, well, we've got this dial here, and if you fly into a storm at the right, you can. Where's the magic? If there had been a magical element, maybe I could buy. Even, I mean, the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was pushing it a little bit, but it was like, all right, fine. It's just nice to see them all back. But this, I just did not buy into the object that they were after.
Yeah, that was my complaint, again, with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I was like, why didn't you make her Marcus Brody's niece? Or that would have at least made me care a little bit more about this than you introduce.
More of a connection.
You introduce a brand new character, and then you introduce that character's daughter. I'm like, well, that's twice removed from why I should care at this point. So that was another. But yeah, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but just flying into a storm and, hey, look, we're back in ancient.
Yeah.
It was a little weird.
And by the way, the way the movie did end, I walked out of the theater saying, yeah, the rumors that I'd heard were true. They reshot that ending several times, and the plan originally probably was to kill off Indiana Jones and have her replace him throughout history. I don't know for sure that those rumors were true, but I'm willing to believe that they were, considering just how the whole thing just kind of wrapped up.
Yeah, based on what we saw, I tend to think, oh, maybe that was probably a spot on rumor. Yeah, but I feel bad for John Rhys Davies because in the past he's always joked that all the best Indiana Jones films have me in them, and now it's like, oh, poor Saleh. He picked a clunker to be his final one.
Well, it's certain. Nobody's going to blame him.
No, of course not.
Nobody's going to blame him.
No.
And nobody's going to blame Harrison Ford either, other than the fact that he went along with it. You know, I mean, if anybody had the clout to say, no, we need to do better, it would have been him. But I think at this point, he was just like, look, this is the best it's going to get. You know, we're either going to do it or we're not. And I have to assume he went in hoping for the best. And I don't think I can't imagine he's happy with how it all turned out.
Probably not. And that's the same kind of ignominious end for Han Solo as well. Getting lightsabered by his own son was kind of a disappointment. We didn't get to see him with Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher all back together. But no, we're not here to pick on Disney. Let's change topics. Star Trek. You got to come in and write the 6th year voyage of the Starship Enterprise with Untold Voyages. It was their second 5-year mission, I should say. What was... Obviously, you're a Star Trek fan if you're going to take on a project like that. But were there things, did you decide I'm going to go back and rewatch all 3 seasons of the original series? What was the prep work that you did for taking on that book?
Oh, I didn't need to. I didn't need to go back and rewatch. They're all living alive in my head. No. If I did go back, it was probably just for inspiration, to just sort of get in the right mind frame, and it was probably very specific episodes, because I was going for a certain feel, or I needed a piece of very trivial information, and I had to make sure that I dovetailed with it perfectly. So, like, for example, one of my issues was a sequel to one of the original episodes. So, of course, I sat down and watched that episode very closely and said, okay, if this character was here, then he has to be here, and this couldn't happen because in the episode it established this, that kind of thing. But the only thing I can remember really sort of doing on a macro level was when we got the green light to do the series, I was like thinking, well, yeah, of course we have to either pick up on continuity from an old episode or do a sequel. So I went and I made a list of like all the episodes, all 79 of the original episodes, and thought about, okay, how did that one end? Like, is there anything there that like a loose end that we can pick up on? And the only one that really spoke to me was an episode called Miri, which if your viewers or listeners out there remember Star Trek, that's the one where they end up on this planet where it's populated only by children. And as soon as they reach puberty, they start to die of this terrible disease that has been keeping them aging at an incredibly slow rate. So these children are hundreds of years old, but they age at a very slow pace. But once they do hit puberty, they contract a fatal disease. So I felt that there was enough there that we could go back and do a story that centers on Dr. McCoy, because he cures the disease. And my premise was, well, what if he didn't really cure it? You know, what if it turns out he thought he cured it, but no, something really bad happens as a result. And so, but yeah, I went back and just basically jotted down the titles of all 79 episodes and thought about what they were about and how they left off. But that's about as much research as I think I needed to do.
There was
for that project.
I think William Shatner, because he wrote a couple Star Trek novels, and I think he wrote the one where the giant cone-shaped thing that was swallowing starships. I think I think it's the episode The Armageddon Factor, if I'm remembering correctly. I could be wrong.
The Doomsday Machine.
Doomsday Machine. Thank you. And he wrote this novel where he tied that in, that actually was created by a race of people who were out to destroy the Borg, and that's why those things were created as Borg killers. Oh,
you know what? That wasn't Shatner.
Okay.
This is me really showing my geek nature. It was actually Peter David.
It was, okay.
In a novel called Vendetta.
Yes.
And it was one of the I believe it was the first novel where the authors of the novels were allowed to use the Borg. And it was this big next generation story where he revealed that the Doomsday Machines were originally built to combat the Borg. That was Peter.
Okay. I get that confused because I know Shatner wrote the one where the Borg harvested Kirk's body and brought him back. And I get those two sometimes mixed up as to which one wrote who, but yeah.
And what you're thinking of, what Shatner did in his novels, was he established that V'ger from Star Trek the Motion Picture was originally, if you remember, it was the Voyager 6 spacecraft.
Right.
And in the motion picture, they revealed that space probe fell into a black hole, emerged on the far side of the galaxy, and landed on a machine planet and was rebuilt into this massive vessel, V'ger. And what Shatner postulated in his novel was that the planet that Voyager 6 landed on, and with a machine planet that rebuilt the ship into V'ger, that was the Borg homeworld.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
That was the connection.
Little conflation, but yeah. So we
that's
got
fine.
But I've never met someone before who's so passionate about Star Trek as Peter David, because I got the chance to interview him at a show, and he talked about the novels he worked on, and I grew up reading a lot of those. But just when you're writing on Star Trek, I would assume you've got to have someone like yourself who has reverence for the source material to really do it justice, to work on comics and work on the novels.
I think probably for the comics and the novels, it requires a certain degree, certainly reverence or respect. I'm of the mind, and it's been proven so many times, you don't have to love something that when you're working on a property, a licensed property, you don't have to love it. You do have to respect it. If you're a good writer, you can fake it. You can make it seem like you love it, even if you don't. The greatest example that I can give, and again, this wasn't a novel, this wasn't a comic book, but Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was written and directed by Nicholas Meyer, who came into it with no love for Star Trek. He'd never really watched the show. He thought of it as, oh, that's the one with the guy with the pointed ears, right? So he came into it with no real understanding or knowledge. And he took a crash course. He watched a handful of episodes, specifically the one featuring Khan,
right?
To understand what he was writing a sequel to. And hands down, you'll never meet anybody who doesn't say that Star Trek II is not only the best Star Trek movie, it's one of the best Star Trek stories that they ever shot in live action. So Nicholas Meyer came into it with no love of Star Trek, but boy, did he do a great Star Trek. And he gained, as a result of that, he gained an appreciation and a respect and a certain degree, and this is him saying it, love for the property, to the point where they kept asking him to come back. I mean, they asked him to come back on 3, he said no. On 4, he said yes. On 5, he said no. And on 6, he said yes. So yeah, I think that it certainly helps to have a love and to be a fan and to be intimately knowledgeable about it. But it's not necessary if you're a professional.
Yeah. There's been some controversy back and forth about where Star Wars is heading, because it seems like every other project is a bit of a clunker lately. Have you ever had any desire to play in that universe, to write a Star Wars story, be it set in the High Republic times, the original trilogy era, anything at all?
We are going to get his answer to that question about whether or not, he's in Star Trek. He knows all about that. We proved that just now, all the stuff he just talked about. If he's ever wanted to dabble in the world of Star Wars, a galaxy far, far away. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Geek to Me Radio on the Big 550 KTRS. Please stand by.
Hey, what's up? This is Taylor Gray, and you're listening to Geek to Me Radio. May the Force be with you, always.
Welcome back to the show. Maybe some of you had the chance to go down to Cape Con, which was this weekend. Taylor Gray was down there along with Vanessa Marshall, a couple people there from Star Wars Rebels. If you missed my interview with Taylor Gray, go to geektomeradio.com and click through there. You can see all the interviews we've had. They are arranged alphabetically when you click on the celebrity interviews page. If you missed the last couple episodes, they're up there too. Please, 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 if you have not already done so, go to youtube.com/geektomeradio. Hit the subscribe button. We are just about 30 people away from hitting 4,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you're listening right now, if you haven't already done so, please go over to youtube.com/geektomeradio, hit the subscribe button, and then click that bell notification. That way, when Joey V is in studio with me, you'll get a notification every time we go live with video, and sometimes my guests appear on camera as well. It's always fun to check those out. This time around, I want to make sure we tell you about our premier sponsor. That, of course, is the Greater St. Charles Convention and Visitors Bureau. DiscoverStCharles.com is the website. If you missed Legends and Lanterns, man, I feel sorry for you because it was such a fun time. The last weekend, they do Pumpkin Glow. They close down the street on South Main Street Friday and Saturday night, and it's just so much fun. Everyone's walking without a care. You get to go and interact with all the characters they've got out there. They had the Pumpkin Glow and Scarecrow Glen, where they had all the businesses. You could decorate a scarecrow and put it around the gazebo. It was a fantastic weekend with gorgeous weather. This is probably some of the best weather that they've had for the festival since I've been involved with them doing Legends and Lanterns now. This was their 9th year, and Ryan Cooper, who's in charge of the events, puts on a fantastic show. He's also in charge of Christmas traditions, and boy, does he have some tricks up his sleeve for the 50th anniversary of Christmas Tradition, the longest running and largest Christmas festival in the country. Ryan Cooper's in charge of all his events, does a fantastic job, and the entire Convention and Visitors Bureau, Elizabeth Phelps, everyone over there, Aaron, who I've been working with on Two Rivers Comic Con, who's helping us over there, just the people who volunteer at the front desk to greet you when you come in. If you've not been to St. Charles lately, go check it out. It's just charming. It's wonderful. There's a great vibe, a really nice energy, and you can get some great food. Go check out the Soda Museum with the vintage arcade in the basement. That is a lot of fun to go look around and see. Check out Cardinal Sin Distillery in the 800 block, or is it the 900? No, it's 800 block of South Main. They've got some really good bourbons and ryes you can check out there. No matter what you're looking to do. I mean, I talked about soda machine or soda museum and arcades to bourbon and whiskey tastings. There's a little bit of something for everyone in St. Charles, but don't take my word for it. Check out the website, discoverstcharles.com. Plan your trip there, whether you're from out of town or like our friend Glenn Greenberg is, or you're here locally like Joey V, who's usually here with me, or you just haven't been across the river lately to go check it out. Plan your trip. Start at the website, discoverstcharles.com. As we always say, it's an historically good time. We're wrapping up my conversation with Glenn Greenberg, and before we took that last break, I was asking him about whether or not he's ever wanted to venture into the Star Wars universe, dabble in the writing for that.
I still have the pitches that I sent to Dark Horse Comics when they had the license, and all the rejection letters that I got. I would love to do Star Wars. That seems to be a very closed shop. At this point, I don't know. I don't want to tell tales out of school, and I don't want to speculate. I get the feeling that you have to be approved by Lucasfilm to work on those Star Wars comics or other publications. I think that it's not like the old days when Marvel had the license the first time, where it's like, oh, Roy Thomas quits. Hey, Archie Goodwin, you want to write Star Wars? It's yours. Oh, Archie, you're leaving? David Michelinie, you want to write Star Wars? It's yours. I think now that there's a lot more red tape, a lot more restrictions. I actually did write a few text pieces for the current run of Marvel Star Wars comics. I'm friendly with the editor, and he was aware, number one, of my love for Star Wars. He was also aware of my journalism background. So when he was launching these one-shot comics based on individual characters, he asked me if I wanted to write some of them. So I give me all the original trilogy characters. Give me Luke. Give me Han. Give me Lando. I got all of those. But even there, you can see the level of review and approvals that these things have to go through. I have to imagine, it's 10 times more complicated when you're dealing with the actual stories and the art and everything. So I just contributed these short text pieces, but giving the history of the characters and some background behind the scenes stuff. That's taking a very journalistic approach. Yeah, I still have a bunch of Star Wars stories in my head that I would love to do. It's just the timing never seemed to work out. I would connect with one editor, and then he or she would leave staff, and then I'd have to start all over again. And at Marvel, it's been pretty stable. In terms of the editor has been overseeing those books for quite a while now. He's aware that I would love to do Star Wars, but I think he's in a position where it's not just up to him to call, to call the writer and say, hey, you want to write this project for me? I think he has to, jump through certain hoops. Yeah. And, it's a lot of cooks cooking that broth. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes the broth doesn't always taste great as a result. But the Marvel comics have been solid. I think the Marvel comic that Star Wars has put out for their main characters has been. I've followed it. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's Charles writing that right now. It's been really solid. Charles Soule. I fell behind on that too. The last thing I read with Star Wars was the last issues of those original runs, like not the original from the 70s. I'm talking about when Marvel first launched. Yeah, they got the license in 2012 or 2015, whenever that was. Yes, and they ran like 75 issues of Star Wars, and I think a lesser number for the Darth Vader series,
right?
And Dr. Aphra. So they ended those series and then started, like a volume 2, for example, set a little further down in the timeline. I haven't read any of those. I only read the comics that take place after the original movie and before The Empire Strikes Back. I thought they started off really, really well. I thought they kind of slumped a little bit towards the end for a variety of reasons, but solid. Yeah, I mean they were as solid as any of the solid stuff that Dark Horse had been doing before that.
Yeah, the current series, I think, just launched issue 50, and it's taking place all the stuff that happened between Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
I think they're on issue 50. It just was the most recent issue that came out. So you're not too far behind, I guess. So.
Yeah, I guess I have about, again, 50 issues of each book to read. So it's just a matter of setting aside the time. I'll get to it. But but your original question was, would I like to write Star Wars the way I wrote Star Trek? Absolutely.
And there are already ideas, like you said, you've already got some ideas and things like that.
And the funny thing is that even despite the fact that the sequel, the prequels have come and gone since then, and the sequels have come and gone since then, my stories are still valid. Like nothing's been contradicted that I couldn't tell them if I got the opportunity to, because they focus on stuff that, the movies and the other comic books didn't really focus on, as far as I know. Like I said, I'm behind. I could be wrong, but I know for sure that the movies didn't touch upon any of the stuff that I want to focus on.
Well, that's definitely helpful. So if the time comes, you can be like, here it is. My last question, because I don't want to keep it too much longer. My last question is, you wrote a great series in 1998 for Marvel on Dracula. And then you mentioned earlier, I think you said you did one of the bookazines for Dracula as well.
Yeah.
So that's a character. You've got the Marvel Comics version. Then you've got the main version that everyone knows. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that series that you wrote would have come out about, 5 or 6 years after the Gary Oldman one, which to me, that's my ultimate Dracula movie, is the one with Gary Oldman, which I want to say was 92 or 93. But
it was 92. So
when you're writing Dracula, what is that? There's the historical aspect, there's the comic book aspect. How does that happen for you to write that, and kind of what were your thoughts going into that book?
Okay. Well, let me start off by saying that I love the novel. It's one of my all-time favorite novels. And just as much as I love the novel, I love Marvel's comic book series, The Tomb of Dracula. I think that it is the greatest treatment of Dracula other than Bram Stoker's novel. I was also a huge fan of Christopher Lee as Dracula in the seven movies that he made. The movies weren't always great, but he was always great. I was not a fan of the Gary Oldman movie. I thought they took a little too many liberties, and they turned Dracula into too much of a sympathetic figure. Whereas I see him as a being of evil. He's a demon in human form, basically, and he was an SOB when he was human too. Yeah. Before he became a vampire, I don't think Dracula was a nice guy who became an evil vampire. He was an evil guy who became an even more evil vampire. So when I first got to Marvel in 1992, it was always in the back of my head, like on my wish list, was I want to do something with Dracula. And I had made several attempts in my early years at Marvel that just didn't come to fruition. And then I came up with this idea for this big story that I wanted to tell. And it percolated for several years. What really sparked that story, the story that I ultimately got to do, it was sparked by watching the TV version of Stephen King's The Stand, a TV miniseries that aired in, I think it was 1994. And by that point, I'd already made a few attempts to do Dracula at Marvel, and nothing came of it. But I watched The Stand, the idea popped into my head, and more or less, that's the idea that I got to do. It just took 4 years from the initial concept to the final version. And so that to me was a dream project. It was the absolute opposite of the Rampaging Hulk. I mean, everything clicked into place on that project. So it was my tribute. It was my love letter to the Tomb of Dracula, to the work that Marv Wolfman, Gene Colan, and Tom Palmer had done on that original series. So it really was a love letter. Now, the bookazine that I did was about the history of Dracula, from inception, from Bram Stoker's original idea, and how his influences and the notes that he took and the way he came up with the idea, the research that he did, and then how the character exploded as, again, a pop culture icon. The very first play, the movies, the comic books, the TV show. I devoted most of one chapter to the Tomb of Dracula, and I remember saying to my editor, I said, I'm going to have to devote a chunk of space to this Marvel comic book series. And he was like, really? Because I think he's one of those people that he understands that comic books are a thing, but I don't think he would attribute a comic book to being one of the most respectful, great versions of Dracula. I said, no. This deserves space in this bookazine. So I devoted a chunk of space to that, and I interviewed Marv Wolfman for it. Dracula, I've loved Dracula since I was a kid, and discovering the Tomb of Dracula series in the late 70s, I discovered it late in the game, and then went back and bought in back issues. I amassed the entire series.
Oh, wow.
All 70 issues and all of his appearances after that. I became hardcore. And so working on writing Dracula for Marvel was a dream project, that I remain very, very, pleased with and proud of. I'm still in touch with, all the members of the team who are still alive. Unfortunately, we lost, our inker, Tom Palmer, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I speak to Pat Olive every now and then, and I'm still very close friends with my editor, Tim Toohey. So that was like a real pleasure project.
Well, I mean, that's probably a good place to stop. We started with a low expectation, a low with the Rampaging Hulk, and now we're at the top of the pyramid there with Dracula. So I think we've come full circle. We'll probably wrap it here then. If people want to keep up with you online, if they want to find out more about you, website, social media handles, things like that people can look for?
I'm on Facebook, I've limited myself to Facebook, but unfortunately I only accept friends that I actually know.
Gotcha.
I've kind of pulled back a little bit from social media. I had a Twitter account. I ended it about a year or so ago. So Facebook really is the only place. I have a blog that I haven't updated in a while, mostly because I do so much writing in my professional life that to write extensively for no pay is like, it was fun. It was fun when I had the time.
Yeah.
But I have not as much time. I will at some point update. And if you want to go back and look at the past things I wrote on my blog, everybody's welcome to do that. The blog is Glenn Greenberg's Grumblings at blogspot.com, and it's Glenn, Glenn, Greenberg, Greenberg, and then S, Grumblings. Go Glenn Greenberg's Grumblings at blogspot.com.
All right, we'll put a link to that. If you're listening to this after the fact in the podcast form, scroll down to the bottom of the page there. We'll have a link to Glenn's blog in our show notes. This has been absolutely great. I'm glad we finally got the chance to talk. I've wanted to have you on the show for quite a while now, so I'm ecstatic that we got to cover a lot of ground, and hopefully I'll run into you at another convention soon. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
That was a great conversation. I really appreciate the time that Glenn Greenberg gave me to chat about comic books and all his work on everything like that. And as a journalist, I had a lot of fun talking to him. Hopefully you all listening enjoyed the conversation as well. We always try to bring you guys stuff that I enjoy. And then hopefully vicariously you can sense my enjoyment of the conversations I have, and you end up enjoying it as well. That's Glenn Greenberg. Again, we'll have links to that if you're listening to this after the fact in the show notes. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, if you're hearing this in the podcast form, we'll make sure we tell you about, once again, Two Rivers Comic Con, the number 2 Rivers riverscomiccon.com is the website. Tickets are now available. We've already had tickets sold. I'm so impressed. We've had people from Indiana buy tickets. We saw some Kentucky, some people from Tennessee. So it's kind of cool that people out of state are already buying tickets to our first year con. And we've got a doozy of a lineup. If you go to Instagram and look for us there, 2 Rivers Comic Con, the number 2 Rivers Comic Con. We are also on Twitter or X or whatever you're calling it, or we want to call it now. So if you follow us on Twitter and Instagram, we do update you with our announcements for who we're bringing in, who our sponsors are, who some of our vendors will be as well. And it's very exciting. I'm both nervous and excited. It's one of those odd feelings. But I'm so excited that so many people have found us already. So many people are looking forward to it nearly as much as I am. And it's just one of those things that sprung out of my desire for St. Louis and St. Charles, this area that I grew up in and have been born and raised in, to have our own con, like Planet Comic Con in Kansas City. That started as a homegrown event, and it's just grown so much over the past 25 years. Same with, I always mention Mitch Halleck and Terrific Con. He started out up there, and now he takes over the entire Mohegan Sun. There's no reason why St. Louis and St. Charles shouldn't have a convention like that, and that's what we're going to do. My partner and I, Paul Gubani, who is helping me out with this con extensively, we decided to put on our very own convention, and we're fans. So we are fans bringing you a fan convention. And we're hopefully going to do St. Louis and St. Charles proud. We've already got plans for a second year and a third year. This year is our superhero theme. So we're bringing in some of the Justice League cast members from the animated series. So we've got Phil LaMarr, we've got Maria Canals-Barrera, and, of course, my good buddy Susan Eisenberg coming. So we've got Wonder Woman, Hawk Girl, and Green Lantern coming in already. We've got Dan Reba, who's a friend of the show, fantastic individual, very talented director and artist. He's coming in, and Alan Burnett, who is the executive producer and writer on a lot of Batman projects like Batman Beyond, Batman the Animated Series. He did Justice League Action. He's going to come in as well, courtesy of Heroic Fine Arts. Not to mention the comic book talent that we've got coming in between Roy Thomas, Missouri native Roy Thomas, who is coming in to sign autographs, meet with everyone. We've got a couple special events planned. We've got people like Phil Hester and Andy Parks. We've got Chuck Patton coming in. We've got Keith Williams. And, of course, my favorite Spider-Man artist, Mark Bagley, is coming in. That's just to name a few. I know I'm forgetting some because we've already announced them, but go to Instagram.com or Twitter and look up 2 Rivers Comic Con. You'll see the information there. Tickets are available now. We are also taking vendor information. If you want to set up at our con, we'd love to have you there, so reach out to us. We can get you information on that as well. That's going to do it. Thanks very much again to Glenn Greenberg for his time. Thank you to the Greater St. Charles Convention and Visitors Bureau, DiscoverStCharles.com, and Bugs Comics and Games for sponsoring the show. Until next week, my friends.
This is Geek to Me Radio. That's our show.
Good night.